agnostics, long-haired weirdos, short-haired weirdos, vandals, hooligans.
The government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government.
Welcome to The Politics Guys, a place for bipartisan, rational, and civil debate on American politics and policy. I'm Michael Baranowski, a political scientist at Northern Kentucky University. I'm joined today by Cleveland area attorney and Republican factotum, Jay Carson. Hey, Jay.
Good morning, Mike. Hey, how are you doing?
I'm doing okay. How about you?
Oh, good. I was counting on you to say something witty as the
I don't even try for witty. You are our resident wit, and so all the pressure is on you. So anyway, so I guess it's been an interesting week, as I guess all weeks will be when we have so much impeachment news to talk about. It's not an everyday sort of thing. So I'll lead off with that. Our first topic today is that for the fourth time in the history of the Republic, the House will be drafting articles of impeachment against the president. This was announced by Speaker Pelosi last week, where she indicated that in her speech that the president had engaged in a long abuse of power, undermining our national security and jeopardizing the integrity of our elections, and had seriously violated the Constitution. In other impeachment news, this of course came as a surprise to no one. In other impeachment news, it was learned that House Intel Chairman Adam Schiff has released some phone logs that he obtained through a secret subpoena to Rudy Giuliani's phone carrier. And there has been some dust up about that I'm sure we'll talk to. And I guess then the third part of impeachment is the fact that we actually have reports now, one from Adam Schiff and the majority on the House Intel Committee, and then sort of a counter report by the Republicans that has been sent to the Speaker, who is then again sending it to the Judiciary Committee. Where we'll take in the next steps of actually drafting articles of impeachment. So, Mike, what are your thoughts of where we go from here? I will pause to say that again, I told you so. But after that, go ahead. Okay. Well, I feel, Jay, I kind of feel like one of the DAs in those cop shows, and the cops are they know that this guy did it, right? And it's just so obvious, and it's just this guy is smirking and then just holding it, in their face, and they go to the DA and they say, "We know this guy did it," and the DA says, "I know this guy did it too, but you gotta bring me the evidence," and that's my frustration. I have no doubt. I have very little doubt. How about that? That the things that Nancy Pelosi and other Democrats are accusing Donald Trump of doing, he did, in fact, do. But dang it, the evidence it's not there, I don't think. And that's the frustration.
David Baranowski, I want this investigation run by the book.
And that's the frustrating thing to me. I get why they're doing what they're doing. But that's my big problem, and it just seems like, well, this isn't a star chamber, as some people on the right are calling it, but it certainly is a political trial, right? I mean, Both sides have their minds made up. Nothing short of a admission on tape, a la Nixon, of Trump saying, that yes, there is a quid pro quo, is going to change anyone's mind, and so. It's just deeply frustrating when you know somebody, or when you have strong reason to believe that somebody is guilty, and yet the people who are conducting the investigation seem basically to have made a political choice, and I get the political choice to, instead of pursuing justice and defending the institutions against someone who I believe is a threat to our elections and our system, instead are choosing the path of greater political expediency. That's frustrating to me.
Well, I guess I'm still of the opinion, and we've talked about this before, that I don't think the facts are that really much in question. As you've said, but then the issue becomes: is something that is impeachable? And again, that's obviously there is no hard and fast standard for that. We had a parade of law professors last week. Again, some swearing this is absolutely impeachable. This is the most impeachable thing they've ever seen. And others saying, well, no, this doesn't comport with what the founders saw as impeachable. Which is, to me, that's a fascinating sort of academic historical question. But the real world doesn't really make a difference, right?
Yeah.
Because they're drafting the articles. And if the defense is well, that wasn't really an impeachable defense or an impeachable offense according to what the founders would have thought. It's not like you can go to court and make that argument. You can make that argument in the Senate.
Yeah.
And I think the Senate, we know where the Senate's going to go with that. So again, I think that's fascinating. I think the Democrats, still, it strikes me though, is this is just, and I'm not just trying to puff up my own prognostication. But to me, this is something that, the launch sequence on this was started years ago, and they had to do it. There's no way to not impeach once you have all these things moving, once you have a special counsel going, once you take the majority, and once you have so many Democrats. Now, it's often the case is made about Democrats who turned the balance of the House were more moderate Democrats from Trump districts, where there was just sort of this sense of return to normalcy sort of thing, as opposed to the ideologues who want impeachment. But I think it's important to remember so many of the more left-leaning Democrats campaigned and pushed of we're going to get rid of Trump. So it's sort of, once you've got the base fired up that much, I think there's no turning back. So.
That, to me, doesn't make any impeachment illegitimate. Just because there are some people who...
No, I'm not saying illegitimate, but I'm still saying a bad idea.
Well, I don't even think it makes it a bad idea. I mean, my position here is somebody who, I certainly think there's strong reason to believe that Donald Trump has committed impeachable offenses. So my argument isn't that impeachment is a bad idea. My argument is that impeachment done on a too quick political timetable is a bad idea. And that, that's been my position for a while now. And pretty clearly everyone wants to get this taken care of by January, February, that sort of thing, and so some of these charges are just, I guess, are kind of confusing to me in one way. Like, the biggest confusion I guess I have, and this gets into my bigger issue with how my party is doing this in Congress, is this obstruction of Congress. Now, I get the argument.
That's not really a thing.
Well, I mean, obstruction is a thing, and I think that's absolutely an impeachable thing because it goes to the heart of separation of powers. But to me,
obstruction of justice is a thing.
Right, but obstruction of Congress in its constitutionally sanctioned role of conducting an impeachment investigation, and I think that in and of itself is an impeachable offense and a removable offense. But the problem is that the Trump side is arguing is making an executive privilege claim, and that's their legal right to do. Now, if the courts determine that that's not a valid claim, and Donald Trump still stonewalled, then that would clearly be obstruction. So it seems to me that the way to do this, if you're concerned more about the sanctity of the system and checks and balances and the power of the presidency and abuses and all of that stuff, is to push this through the courts to the end. And then if the Trump administration is still stonewalling, then you have a rock solid case for obstruction. How could you argue? How could anyone, how could even Jim Jordan argue that that's not obstruction, right? If the Supreme Court says, no, these people have to testify, no, you have to turn over these records, and then Trump says, I'm not going to, well, that's about as textbook obstruction as you can get. And under those grounds, I would bet that even you would say, well, at that point, the president should be impeached and removed.
Well, I'd wait on the evidence, but I don't know because first of all, there was some late breaking news this morning, and I don't know whether you had seen it yet, but the Supreme Court has stayed
Mhm.
the orders that Trump turned over financial documents in a sort of just summary opinion written by none other than Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
Right, and that's just for a week till the 13th, I believe, so
Sure.
that the Trump administration can make its case. They get a little more time, so it's a pretty short-term stay.
Sure, but still, there is a recognition of executive privilege. But to me, I'd almost argue the other way. Isn't it sometimes the executive's job to obstruct Congress? Could the executive charge Congress with obstruction of executive workings? I mean, this is the nature of our Constitution. Is these branches are supposed to be at odds with each other, and it comes down to, in this sort of thing, a political contest of look, where are the people going to be at the end of the day? Are they going to view Congress's actions in this as overstepping their bounds, or will they view the president as overstepping his bounds, or both, or will they just not care?
My God, Jay.
I think that's the thing, and so I'm saying as far as going to court, though, I mean, because I think that's a separate question.
Congress overstepping its bounds. Congress for a century now has just basically turned itself into this complete constitutional weakling vis-a-vis the president. And the idea that all of a sudden Congress is too powerful is a joke, I think, almost. And so, I mean, the problem, and I think you would agree, that the problem we've seen in American government just writ large over the last, century, is that the executive is far too powerful, and it's become, and it's become that way because Congress has let the executive become too powerful.
Yeah, no, in areas of regulatory policy, and Congress just sort of writing essentially blank regulatory checks to the executive, or things like allowing various executive overrides of like the we had the travel ban issue that came down to could the president of national security say this is, but in terms of investigation, though, that's something different. And you have a situation here where Congress is digging into trying to get at the personal conversations between the president and his advisors. This is all based on the report of an anonymous whistleblower who obtained information that probably would want to be classified from a private conversation between the president and a foreign leader.
Let me just interrupt just for a minute. Sure. There, Jay, is that it's not actually all based on the report of an anonymous whistleblower. That was the thing that started it all off, but now there have been multiple people who have come forward and issued statements that are largely congruent with one another. So while the whistleblower report is, you're right, the thing that started it and was a part of it, now you could take the whistleblower report out of it entirely, and there is enough of a case that the president has done things that at least are certainly should be questionable to most folks.
Sure. There's also, I mean, but here's the thing. If we're talking about executive privilege and in the balance of power between Congress and the presidency, if Congress can assume the power of being able to call all these witnesses based on one anonymous report and be able to get into the nitty-gritty of what a president said, what people overheard while they're in the other offices in the White House. I think that's troubling. If you're a foreign leader and you're going to have a frank conversation with the president, wouldn't that give you a little bit of pause?
Well,
knowing that whatever you say may be subject to all coming out again.
But I think you already know that, as has been documented, that when the president talks to foreign leaders, it's not like he's just, picking up his iPhone and making a private call. There are a lot of people who are in the
room. Absolutely.
There are plenty of people on both sides who are in the room. And so as a foreign leader, you understand that is not a secure and private conversation. And so if a president says things that are well outside the bounds, you I mean, you have no reasonable expectation of any sort of privacy in that kind of communication. Now,
Wow.
well, you don't, because if you're talking with someone and you know that there are maybe 10, 15, 20 other people listening, do you have a reasonable expectation of privacy?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
In
If you
what
are,
world?
no,
In what
absolutely.
world, Jay? On both sides.
In the
So,
world,
okay,
in the world of presidents and chief executives,
you really think that's how it
if
works? I had no idea you were that naive. That's stunning.
wow. Well, let's consider this. Um, say the Trump calls Netanyahu, or Netanyahu calls Trump,
Mhm.
and says, "Hi, Donald. Sorry, sorry to hear you got troubles. Boy, let me tell you.
Yeah,
Um,
sure.
but tell you what, I just wanted to give you a heads up. We are attacking Iran in 2 days. Um, now, keep that under your hat, please. We'd rather it not get out."
Right.
And Trump says, "Sure, you got it. That's terrific, baby. Best of luck to you." Um, in that case, would not Netanyahu have some expectation that
Sure.
the
I
people
see what
who
you're
are
saying.
listening
Yeah.
would be subject
Yeah.
to sort of the national security secrecy requirements? And when you're
Right.
sitting in the room with the president talking to a foreign leader, it's not something you go out
Yeah.
and blab about.
Yeah, and that's
my
I
point.
see what you're saying. Yeah, and that's a fair point. And I guess what I'm arguing is when you have a bunch of people on the call, many of whom, just like the president, have taken an oath to defend the Constitution, and they hear things that they believe are maybe deeply troubling, like Lieutenant Colonel Vindman did, and they report these things, and nothing seems to happen, or they don't feel something's happening. So it goes back to
then they ought to resign.
Well, they certainly can. That's one option that's open to them, but there are also options. I mean, there's a reason why we have whistleblower laws and protections. There's a reason why we have inspectors general, and is it inspectors general, like attorneys general? I believe so. But there's a reason why we have all of these procedures in place, because we understand that while certainly what I'm saying is it's not black and white. You're right. Executive privilege is there for a reason, and it's an extremely important value. But it's not the only value, and that's the role of the courts, is when there are these conflicting claims, then It's the role of the courts to adjudicate them, and it's not the role of the executive.
I don't disagree with you that executive privilege is a question for the courts.
Yeah, and and there are some certainly who would say that, well, no, this is not a non-justiciable thing. The courts don't have any say in this. It's just if the executive says, the kind of John Yoo sort of approach. Is John Yoo? Is that right? Yeah. I certainly reject that, and I think you do as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But no, I would say though that the impeachability of an offense is non-justiciable.
Right. Yeah, I would agree. I mean, that's a political question.
That's a different question.
Yeah,
just so we're all clear. Well, the other piece though that I think is troubling. Again, if you want to talk about congressional power versus executive power, what of the Adam Schiff subpoenas to AT&T, which were sent in secret? The House members, Republican House members, could not say anything about it because of the secrecy of the committees. And AT&T rolled over, like the corporate stooges they are, and have handed them the call logs of, the president's attorney. Does that give you pause?
I guess I would need to know more about whether the subpoenas were legally issued. As far as I know,
sure.
So
I mean, they were issued. Well, there's a question there because they were issued before the official announcement of the impeachment investigation. Mm-hmm. So there's a question of whether Congress has a legitimate interest in getting this information. So that would be the defense. Sure. That at the time there was no legitimate interest, and you could even make the argument that even post impeachment there's no legitimate interest. But I think the troubling piece of this is that as a practical matter, that AT&T did not go to court, could not go to court, and just said, "Oh, here you go," and then Schiff has now released them. I mean, again,
well, AT&T could have refused.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so it sounds like your problem is more with AT&T.
Oh, it is.
Okay.
It's both.
Because I mean, if people do things that you feel while legal are unethical, I mean that's the. I mean, I don't necessarily think that it's unethical. I think that as long as it was within the bounds of the law, then that's a reasonable path to take.
Well, I think there may be some, and it was also Devin Nunes call logs were grabbed, and again, I think that's even a tougher one to claim illegitimate, because it very much looks like you're just using the congressional subpoena power to dig up dirt on your political opponents. Which we know is some, and let's put it this way: why would AT&T do this? Of course, is they don't want to offend Congress. So, I mean, I think that's troubling as a civil libertarian if Congress can in secret. Because keep in mind that the actual targets of these subpoenas in a typical court proceeding, you would get notice.
Right. And I take your point. No, I take your point on that. And I think the part of it that does give me some pause is the secrecy of it. So yeah, I think that's a valid point, So yeah, absolutely. I guess another thing about this whole issue that seems strange to me is now we have multiple people, not all Republicans, but some Republicans, making this argument that Ukrainian officials expressing concern with, at that point, candidate Donald Trump's policies is basically the same thing as a coordinated Russian attack on our elections. I mean, that sort of equivalency, that sort of false equivalency, it just blows my mind. I never thought I would see. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I don't think that. I think that's a little far-fetched to say that. But there were reporting. There was contemporaneous reporting in 2016 in Politico, in also in the European Union press that said, alleged Ukrainian involvement in the U.S. election. It may be true. It may not be true.
Let's stop there, because we can say, I could say, well, it may be true, it may not be true. That's a very interesting way to frame it, certainly, especially when our intelligence agencies have looked into it. And so really the way to frame it based on the evidence we have, I'd say, was that it's almost certainly not true. It has been discredited by our own intelligence agencies, but it is a conspiracy theory that the President of the United States chooses to believe and has, encouraged others to believe and parrot. And that's like David French, who's used to write for National Review, I think now writes for that new thing, The Dispatch, has said, this is what happens when the President of the United States is a genuine conspiracy theorist. And he certainly has a right. long history of that, from the birtherism to, and so that to me is another.
No, absolutely. And that's, he could be dead wrong. It could be a crazy conspiracy. But does that make the president's inquiry into that illegitimate?
No, I see what you're saying. It doesn't make the inquiry itself into it illegitimate, but of course there are.
He has the constitutional authority to be absolutely wrong and to ask incredibly stupid questions.
But there are also ways that you can legitimately investigate something, and ways that you can't. Just like you brought up the issue of the subpoenas, right? And you say, well, it's not the question of the subpoenas, it's the question that it was done in secret. And I would say, right. Okay, that's a reasonable point. And I would say, well, it's not the question that Trump wanted to investigate corruption in Ukraine, or maybe even argue that the Bidens were somehow involved. It's that he did it through this back channel with his personal attorney and didn't do it through open channels, that sort of thing. So I think
I still differ with you on that, because I don't see the difference. I think the president can work through whatever channels he wants to. Right? So what in the Constitution says you have to go through the process with the State Department?
He can work through his personal attorney, who can claim a client attorney privilege and all this, who has a personal attorney who also has all sorts of intricate dealings, financial and otherwise, in Ukraine, and none of that bothers you?
Oh, it bothers me. I think it's troubling for a lot of reasons, but I don't think it's unconstitutional. I don't think it's
Okay, no,
impeachable.
okay. Well, there's the difference
If
there,
you follow
Jay.
me,
There's
you know
the
what I'm saying. I
difference,
mean,
and that's the
I'm saying
whole
there could
point.
be all kinds. Yeah.
You've talked about Hamilton before, and I know you're a big fan. And Hamilton, talked about the impeachment not being and removal not being a political or constitutional thing in that sense, but being a violation of the public trust. And if
Sure.
you are doing nothing illegal, but you are in some way violating the public trust and not upholding, the Constitution of the United States in the broadest sense, well, that is impeachable and removable.
I think you can. I think it's a fair argument. I just don't think it's there, and I don't think they've gotten to that point. And
sure,
I think
and
the defense,
I agree with you on
the
that.
defense to it.
I agree with you on that. That they don't. That the evidence isn't there, which is why I hope when they draft the articles that they include an article about obstruction on the Mueller report, because I think there's a lot more clear evidence of obstruction there. And certainly, having read the report, it's all over the place. And Mueller, I think, was, obviously right on the borderline of whether or not to indict, but because there's that policy in place, he didn't. And so I think that would be a much stronger case. And it seems like there's some
keep in mind, Mueller would not have had the authority to indict.
Right. And so
right. I mean, Mueller would have said, I am making finding of obstruction,
right, yeah.
And then it goes to the Justice Department to indict
right,
or not indict.
Yeah.
At that point, then there's other political things in play.
Yeah. Right. Okay. Good point. And it seemed like, from that one statement, that, well, I'm not saying that he didn't do it. I'm not saying that he did it. And so yeah, I think that's a much stronger case to make for obstruction. And I'm hoping that is one of the articles. But I think as a more practical matter,
I have no doubt it will be.
Well, there's been some debate within the party, because there are some people who feel that basically a cleaner, just focused on this one thing, impeachment articles would make more sense. But then again, I think you're right. I think it will be included. I think that's a good thing.
I think there will be. I think it will be everything in the kitchen sink. It will be.
It'll be very limited. There'll be 3 or maybe 4 articles. There won't be that many articles. It won't be all the things. I don't think there'll be an emoluments clause thing.
It won't be 20 articles, but those articles will be. And this is something that, and we'll move on to the next subject because I know we're burning time here. But this struck me that one of the problems that the Democrats have gotten, and this is, I'm not saying it's a legal problem. This is a political problem. Is throughout this, from the Mueller report through now, they have sort of overpromised, overstated, and the reason I pointed to like Pelosi's statement and also Adam Schiff's report, when they say things that they have engaged in, have undermined national security, jeopardized the integrity of our elections. And the Schiff report sort of went through a litany saying, Trump is basically the worst president ever. No one has ever done anything even closely as horrendous as this. I think that overstating it, that leaves a lot of people just kind of, scratching their heads like, it makes it look more political. I mean, in my experience, in court, the strength of your case is usually inversely proportional to the number of adjectives that you use. So, if you can go out and say the president broke the law, he needs to be impeached, that's a much stronger statement than what we've got.
Yeah, and I don't know that the president actually has broken any laws. I mean, Nixon was a lot easier case to make because he broke a bunch of laws and it was on tape. That's a slam dunk sort of thing.
Obstruction. Trump was, Clinton was perjury.
Clearly
and
broke a law. Yeah, exactly.
No one's really sure what the hell Andrew Johnson did, but
right. It was president at the wrong time, pissed off the wrong folks. Yeah, exactly. But no, I take your point. It's not as strong of a case as I would like it to be, and that's to me comes back to my thing I mentioned at the top when we were talking about this. It's so deeply frustrating when you believe there is a case to be made, but it's not being made, and so I'm more I mean, I expected the Republicans to rally around the president and, put that before our national security concerns and all that, because that's just how the game seems to be played. I feel more on the right than on the left.
National security concerns.
Well, just say,
national security concerns.
Let me just say, I just think that Republicans, not all Republicans, but plenty of Republicans seem far less concerned about Russian aggression and our Russian influence in our elections, because they're more concerned about their own short-term electoral interests. And hey, that's a choice they want to make. Okay, fine. But to me, the bigger disappointment to me is not with the Republicans, but it's with, once my party decided to go ahead with impeachment, for them not to make an all-out attempt to make the strongest possible case. And so that, I think, is the most harmful thing, because if you go at the president and you don't bring your strongest case because you're concerned that it's going to interfere with your primary season, I think that's doing a disservice to the institutions and to the country. So I'd like to see the Democrats go harder, push more in the courts, and really make a real attempt to do everything they possibly can to bring to light what I believe to be the crimes of this president.
Okay, one last thing, just because
Sure.
You mentioned they're rushing it for the primary season, and I would disagree with you there, because I think the reason they're rushing it and they need to get this done early in the year is because the longer the clock ticks, the less needed impeachment seems to be.
Right. Sure. That's another good point. Yeah, absolutely. The argument of, well, we're going to have an election.
The clock is ticking, and every day that we get closer to November, it strengthens the Republican argument about why are we doing this? We got an election in X number of months. Let's let the voters decide. And it puts the Democrats in the position of, well, we don't, because we don't like how they decided last time.
I want to ask you about that argument. I'm glad you brought that up, Jay, because it seems to me that argument boils down to, well, this person may have done some egregious things, but because he did them at point X in time, as opposed to X minus 2 or 3, we're going to let it slide. And so I would think that to me, that's not a good argument, saying that, hey, if you believe that the president did things that should make him subject to impeachment and removal, it doesn't matter if you find out about that 2 months before the election. You have a duty, because all members of Congress have sworn a duty to protect and defend the Constitution, that your constitutional duty is to proceed with that with whatever time you have left.
Well, if you're protecting and defending the Constitution, there's also a lot in there about the people electing the president. So it's sort of a balancing act, right? And you weigh the egregiousness of the offenses, the need for an immediate removal versus the need for an election, or whether someone can be removed through election. And I mean, keeping in mind, Nixon and Clinton were both in their second term when they were impeached. Right. So there was a little bit of a different dynamic at work there, because there wasn't going to be another election, at least as to that president. Yeah. Good point. So no, I mean, I think it's an argument, and even so, look, it's not. We're not talking about legal arguments. We're talking about political arguments. Yeah. And the people in Congress who are going to do the impeaching have to convince the people back home that, look, we have a really good reason we're jumping in and doing this, and not just letting you vote on it. Yeah.
And from the beginning, Jay, I was pushing kind of along the lines of Nancy Pelosi that I didn't think this was a good thing to do. I didn't think, that it was there and it was going to. And so I was arguing for caution. But I think once you go in, once you go in, you got. I really feel, I've tried. That's all I can say. I've tried.
So, so moving on, because we'll be talking about impeachment next week too, I bet. Maybe not you and I, but whoever is on. Yeah. And also, speaking of prosecutors, presidential hopeful Kamala Harris has ended her bid for the presidency, citing fund ratings difficulties that she is just, and also just the fact she didn't cite this. I'm citing this has really failed to gain traction since back in the summer, where she was sort of seen as the rising star, if not the front runner, sort of the ascendant challenger, probably the best. Harris has noted that she was not a billionaire, um, and that she can't fund her own campaign like other billionaires who would remain nameless in this campaign. She is also vowed to keep fighting. She was vowed to keep fighting about a whole lot of stuff, and also vowed to keep fighting every single day. I suppose even holidays and weekends for what she believes in. And my sense from that is she'll keep fighting to maybe be a vice presidential nominee.
Yeah.
So that was the one big development in the Democratic field. The other is that Joe Biden has launched on what is he's calling it's the charmingly quaint No Malarkey tour.
Oh my gosh!
I'm as a Republican strategist, what could possibly go wrong with that? But
yeah.
So what are your thoughts on the also? I mean, the other piece I was going to note is that Harris's withdrawal leaves the field again much older and whiter than it was when we started last week.
Yeah, well, in a way, this is a comparison most people wouldn't expect. In a way, Harris reminds me of Bob Dole. You probably know. Okay, you got that one. Okay, because folks who've been following politics for a while will recall that Bob Dole at one point said, "You want me to be another Ronald Reagan? I'm willing to be another Ronald Reagan if that's what you want." And it's just like Bob Dole wanted to be president because it was Bob Dole's turn to be president, I guess, and he paid his dues. And I think that was a big part of the Harris campaign is she stood for some stuff, kind of, sort of, but it was more like, well, what do you want me to stand for? I can be more liberal. I can be more conservative, just I'll do that thing. Sure. And I think that was the biggest part of it. And so she was on paper, maybe looked, I think a lot of people downplayed the extent to which her being a prosecutor hurt with African American audiences, and that led to some skepticism, certainly. And there's that whole weird electability thing. I think there are a lot of folks, including minority voters, who say, right, we're going to elect a black woman. That's going to happen. I don't think so. And I think that's unfair. But if people, as long as people believe that means that's a harder thing for a black female candidate to deal with. And not shockingly, it's harder just in general to be a female, and to be a minority female in America is harder still. And so, Harris is right, I think, in saying it's not fair. But, that's what she had to overcome, and she just wasn't able to do it.
Well, I think the other thing that, and you were right in pointing this out, is that she didn't really develop an identity. Yeah. And she sort of became, sort of the overnight sensation after that first or second debate or whatever it was, when she went after Joe Biden on busing, of all things.
Right.
And there was sort of this like great Twitter updraft of liberals or leftists, or how progressives, maybe I should call them, who love this, and either she's putting Biden in her place. But then the next day, sort of it dawned on her. Oh yeah, do we want to run on busing?
Yeah.
In the year 2020, on an issue that was decided and no one really liked back in the 70s. And then likewise with the healthcare, she was for Medicare for all, and then maybe not, and you can keep your plan, but kind of, and just it was just sort of a muddled. She couldn't get to the left of either Bernie or Elizabeth Warren, and she she just kind of didn't have. She got kind of merged. It's kind of like there were, again, everyone talks about lanes in politics. There was like a couple lanes kind of merging, and she just didn't have a lane to stay in.
Yeah, that's an interesting point you make about the lanes, because while the media and all of the people in what I guess we'd call the highly engaged public are, firm believers in this lanes idea. There was some recent polling that came out on this about asking thousands of Democratic voters, or likely Democratic voters, about their first and second choices, and to get a sense of, if these lanes actually, if it's just a name recognition thing. And basically, at this point, at least, for regular Democratic voters, This seems to be much more of a name recognition thing and not like an ideological thing, but more of a, well, who do I know, number one, and number two,
Right.
who do I think
And
has
obviously
the best...
Joe Biden is number one.
Exactly. And number two, who do I think has the best chance of beating Donald Trump is number two. So
Yeah.
I think that the lanes thing is real, but I think that the media tends to overplay it a little bit, or maybe a lot, actually. But and so it'll be interesting to see what happens, because they're obviously, Harris put together a pretty good organization. And so a lot of those people are going to be sought after. There were some reports that within, before the body was cold, as they say, they were getting calls and that sort of thing. But, a lot of minority voters are still sticking with Joe Biden. And I guess because certainly out of Joe Biden's mouth, it seems like my friend Barack, that sort of thing, But on to Biden, he got that endorsement this week from John Kerry, 75-year-old John Kerry with his finger on the pulse, I guess. But yeah, I love the. And, the No Malarkey tour you mentioned, it's easy to make fun of. I thought about that. So certainly it's not designed to bring in the kids, right? But, but.
Well, it's sort of like the, so dorky, it's cool, kind of,
Well, yeah, but if you look at
Iowa, campaigning ironically.
Well, I don't necessarily think so, because I think that Joe Biden isn't like an ironic guy. He's not like that. But if you take a look at Iowa Democratic caucus goers, at least from 2016, so I mean, the biggest percentage of them are 37% are under 45, were under 45, 36% were 45 to 64, and 28% were 65 or older. So I would guess to that 28%, No Malarkey might sound reasonable, and maybe to that other, 45 to 64, that 36%, okay, fine. So I think he's playing more to what he thinks is going to energize Iowa caucus goers, who are also, very much white folks, 91% white in 2016. And he's also trying to show, I think, the old guy's still feisty, right? Saying Buttigieg stole my health care plan, and that guy who talked about his son's work in Ukraine, you're a damn liar, that kind of thing, because if you take a look at the polls right now, things had been pretty static. But if you look at Iowa right now, Buttigieg actually has a pretty strong lead in Iowa over everyone else. And New Hampshire, I mean, Buttigieg actually is in the lead right now in New Hampshire. Now, nationally, that's not the case. You still have pretty clearly Biden's been hanging out around, in the upper 20s for a while. And then you have that, Sanders, Warren, and then Buttigieg. But I think those national numbers are obviously a bit misleading, because the people who aren't that focused on the race are going to be taking a lot of their cues from the coverage of Iowa and New Hampshire and so forth. So I think that's, a little bit of what we're seeing in the polling.
So here's my thing. This is just purely campaign strategy sort of thought. But as your sense that the word malarkey, which is, I guess, can be
I'm
defined.
so glad we get to say that word so often on this show. I love it.
Well, and this is quite honestly, I think, his problem. I mean, does he mean it as the sort of no BS? I'm not Trump. I'm not. You're not going to get that. Or is it no malarkey in that? Is there an implied in there? Look, none of this goofy stuff, like Medicare for all and reparations and all that. I'm sort of signaling, look, I'm just a regular run-of-the-mill Democrat sort of guy.
Yeah, absolutely.
As opposed to, and is it essentially saying, no huge crazy restructuring of this? Is that the message?
Yeah, that's a great point. I hadn't thought about it in those terms, but also
pay me for this.
Well, if you take a look, for instance, at the tax plan that Joe Biden released this week, it's essentially what the tax code. And this is oversimplifying, but it's basically what the tax code was under the Obama presidency. So it's just rolling back the GOP tax plan and making it what it was under his good friend Barack. And that seems to be the biggest part. Well, it seems to me there are two planks to the Biden campaign. One is, I am the person best positioned to beat Trump. And third, I am just going to be more like an old white version of Barack Obama. So if you want a third term of Obama, just elect me and I'll give you. You want me to be Obama? I can be Obama for you. You know, I mean, just not as good of a speaker. And so that to me is the fatal flaw, because I think if you're campaigning on the idea that, well, I want to be president because I want to be president.
My turn.
Yeah, it's my turn. And Joe Biden's been running for president for 30 years, more than that, something like that.
We were in high school when he was running for president.
There you go. And we are not young folks. So I think that to me is not exactly disqualifying, but if you do not have a good answer to that question, why you, then I don't think it's going to work. And I think, we take a look. Donald Trump had a great answer to that question, why you. Hillary Clinton did not. Right? Barack Obama had a great answer to that question, why you? And the people running against him, I don't think so much did. And so,
right. And John McCain was, again, it's my turn.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so I think that's so important. I think that's what killed Harris's campaign. And I think that's why Joe Biden is not going to be nearly as strong of a candidate as a lot of people think, because I think he believes he's ultimately a politician who believes that he should be president, because he's believed it since he was probably somewhere in his 30s, like half a century ago. And that's a horrible reason to want to be president or to be president,
Yeah. Well, to me, again, this is even just again, we're getting to like the linguistics of it. And if I were Biden's campaign people, I would just be cringing, because if you're running against Trump, I mean, you have forever tied the name of Biden to Malarkey now, right?
Sure.
That's what we're going to remember. It's almost like the Carter whip inflation now buttons. Right. I'm sorry, that's Ford. Whip inflation now buttons.
Yep.
Yeah, and that it was just win. It was just so goofy.
Yeah,
and it was just so and so I think anytime Biden says anything, Trump will open with, "That's a bunch of malarkey." I mean, it's sort of that's what I would do.
Well, I mean,
the Saturday Night Live skit kind of writes itself, right? It's almost like the Al Gore lockbox thing, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's.
Well, I think
it's just a bad bad branding.
Yeah,
I think
when I envision presidential debates between Donald Trump and Joe Biden, I do not even want to envision it, because I just see utter disaster for Joe Biden in that sort of form, and so I do not think that Joe Biden should be anyone who wants to defeat Trump's choice for the presidential nominee, because I just do not see that ending well, even a little bit.
Right. What was your son Hunter up to in the Ukraine, Joe? It's a bunch of malarkey. I mean,
yeah.
It's bad. So anyway, moving on to something policy related.
Before we do move on, Jay.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, we got to thank people.
We do actually. We have a bunch of new supporters, and we'd like to thank you. We have Robin, Ed, Mark, and Megan, all new supporters, and thank you so much. Robin wrote in, I'm a 71-year-old grandmother attempting to understand our current political world by combining what I can learn with what I've experienced so far in my life. The Politics Guys podcast is invaluable to me. So thank you, Robin. We definitely appreciate that. Megan wrote, I've been listening to your podcast for a while now and appreciate hearing all the different perspectives. I've thought about becoming a supporter for several months, and your Black Friday / Cyber Monday deal finally moved me, from want to support to actually supporting. Keep up the good work. And then finally, Garrett wrote, I've been a listener for 3 years, and I finally have the ability to contribute now that I've graduated college and have a steady income. You've all done a lot to help shape my outlook on American politics, and I'm very thankful for the work that you do. I've yet to find a source of news and commentary.
That really means a lot. I mean, we probably don't say that enough.
Yeah. He said, I've yet to find a source of news and commentary that I feel comes close to the balanced and thoughtful analysis I get from the Politics Guys every week. So I thought that was really nice. We really appreciate that. And of course, when you become a supporter through Patreon, you get access to our weekly bonus show and a bunch of other things that we put together for supporters at all kinds of levels. To check it out, click on the support link in the show notes or go to patreon.com/politicsguys or just go to politicsguys.com/support. And also, Jay, one thing I wanted to let you know about, and every listeners as well, Wilmer Moreno, one of our executive producers, he had this great idea. He wanted to give the politics guys as a holiday gift. Which I thought, He said, can we do that? And I said, I don't know. Sure, why not? And so I figured out a way to do it. If you're interested in setting someone up as a supporter, giving them access, to the bonus show, Quick Takes, and, at the $10 a month level, Politics Guide, mug, tote bag, whatever, I'd be happy to help you out. Patreon doesn't do gift memberships, which they should, but I figured out a way around that system, and I'd be happy to help you make that happen. So if you're interested in that, just email me at mike@politicsguys.com and I will get you all set up. The Politics Guys, it makes a great gift for that hard to buy for
person. It's going to be
person.
the best Christmas ever.
There you go. Jay, and we have at least one more story we want to get to. Sorry, I interrupted you there, but go ahead.
No. Well, this is more, actual policy stuff. Is that the Trump administration announced it's going to be instating a new rule that will, to some extent, reinstate work requirements for all able-bodied people receiving aid under the federal SNAP program. That's the food stamps program. Essentially, what the new rules would do would curb states' abilities to get waivers of this. The way the program works is that the law, as it starts out, says if you're able-bodied and under 65, you have to commit to working either 20 hours a week or doing 20 hours a week of some sort of job or vocational training. But states are allowed to waive that requirement in areas where the unemployment rate is 20% above the national average. Now, what had happened is you have a lot of states where they could sort of creatively draw these districts. For example, Illinois is entirely one district except for one county, and come up with the numbers that, okay, this is enough to get the waiver. So this is aimed at curbing that. The total effect on this is expected of 7.3 recipients of the 36.4 million people who currently receive SNAP aid. So, Mike, I guess you can probably guess where I would be coming from on this one as a cold-hearted conservative. But what are your thoughts?
Well, I think there's a conservative case actually to be made for it. Now,
how about there we go.
On the front line, of course, it saves a little bit of money, just a bit over $1 billion a year. All right.
Right.
But actually, and here's, I think, the conservative economic growth case is the Agriculture Department itself, which administers this, in July of 2019 issued a report finding that for every additional dollar spent on food stamps, which is the SNAP program, overall economic activity rises by up to $1.50. So this is actually a pro-growth policy that's being cut, which seems odd to me. Not only that, but the waiver policy actually, I think, makes a lot of sense because I feel like if a county can make a good case for a waiver, they should be given the opportunity to do it. And this is basically a conservative federalism argument, I would say. And so I'd like to see more flexibility for these local conditions, essentially, because now under these new rules, if an area has a sudden sharp increase in unemployment, it can't qualify. In fact, the only way it can qualify is if its average unemployment rate over the past 24 months is both 20% above the national average and also at least 6%. And 24 months is a long period of time. I thought
it was actually 7.3, or no, I'm sorry. 6%. I'm sorry. That's correct.
And so I have a problem with that 24 months thing. I think that's far too long. And so that's why I think this could have been drawn, especially given the fact that the agriculture departments, and this is the Trump agriculture department's own research has found that this is a pro-growth program. I think this is a short-term game and a long-term opportunity missed. And of course, it's not like SNAP is this massive handout to folks. Average monthly SNAP benefits are $165, which doesn't go very far. And so I think on all those grounds, this is just a big mistake.
Well, I guess go back to the core of this, though, which came out of the Clinton changes to welfare, right? Ending welfare as we know it back in the 90s. And the idea was that setting aside, and I agree with you, the savings from a fiscal conservative point. It's great to save $1 billion in the great scheme of things. That doesn't really move the needle budget wise, but that there's a certain pro growth, good policy to have people working who can work. Right now, we've got a situation where we've got record low employment, and businesses are still complaining they can't find enough qualified workers. There are more jobs openings than there are people who are filling them, and that to me is a that's a constraint on growth. That's one. The second is there's value and there's dignity in work, and this is one of these things that it's difficult to quantify. But I think Bill Clinton got it. That this is. I mean, if you can work, you ought to. And just because you do go to work doesn't mean you surrender your SNAP aid. I mean, and again, we're talking about 20 hours of work or some sort of training so that you can get a better job. I think it strikes me as sort of a common sense sort of thing.
I think the logic is questionable, because this idea that $5 a day in food aid, which is what that average monthly SNAP benefit works out to, is going to be enough to have somebody say, oh, well, you know what? I was just going to sit home and try to make $5 a day, feed my family of three, feed myself, because it only applies to individuals.
Right, exactly. So this
$1 something a meal. Wow, this is what's keeping me from working. I think it's a fallacious argument. I just do not understand. On no level does this make sense to me, especially given the fact that this is shown by the Agriculture Department's own research to actually generate economic activity. And so, the logic that makes a lot more sense to me is, hey,
what's the Agriculture Department comparing it to? Are they comparing it to this giving out this money generates more activity than just not giving it out, or are they comparing it to giving out versus having this person employed somewhere?
Well, sure, but I think the argument, again, this is where the fallaciousness of the argument comes in. I believe this idea that a human being, any even semi-rational human being, would say, well, I really should be looking for work, but I've got this SNAP money and I'm good, because hey, it's $5.30 a day, so I'm okay. Really, I don't need to look for work. The idea that would be enough to get somebody to make that decision, I think is ludicrous to me.
So you're saying we should cut more benefits?
No, I'm saying that there's no logical reason that I can see to actually cut these benefits.
Well, the logical reason to me is that if someone is able to work and there are jobs available, they should work.
And I think they already are. That's my point, is that this idea that somebody is not working because they're getting SNAP benefits I think is ridiculous.
Well, why aren't they working?
Because they can't find jobs.
Okay. I mean, I guess to me, then that goes to, look, then we're offering, there's this area where you can, 20 hours of education. And again, there are numerous, there's a federal program that provides workforce investments. I served on the board for the one here in Cleveland. That's what they do is they train people. If you don't have the skills to, if the big employer in your area shut down and you need to be retrained to do something else, there are avenues to do that.
And those are universally available.
We're spending a lot of federal money to finance those avenues. People ought to take advantage of them if they need to.
So it's their fault.
Well, it's not mine. I mean, I guess it's. I'm not sure.
I don't know. It just seems to me part of this larger idea of, if we just make people miserable enough, they'll get off their lazy asses and work. And I just reject that.
Well, I would say it's a matter of, we have historically low unemployment. This is the lowest unemployment rate in 50 years. And yet American businesses are still looking for workers. Now, there's always going to be some sort of mismatch between, either geographic of here's where these businesses are and here's where the workers are, or here's the skills we want and here's the skills the workers have.
Sure.
But what I'm saying is there are ways to address that. And I see
what you're saying, but when you have a program that bases these benefits on average unemployment rate over 2 years, that seems to me to be not nearly responsive enough to what might be happening at that time. So I might be willing to.
I think that's a fair argument.
Okay. But... So that at least maybe that's one area that we could agree on. There could be possibly some area.
Some sort of override of if you're in a place that geographically, and again, my sense would be. If some place closed, well, and keep in mind, I think this only cuts you off. You have an initial
how
3
many months, I believe
regardless.
it is. Yeah,
regardless of anything.
Yeah.
So again, I hate to sound like a Scrooge here, but this seems to me. I think there's.
Yeah.
I'll just tell you something quick anecdotally because of when I served on this workforce investment board. That we often ran into, there were sort of two tracks of people that we dealt with, and there was one track of folks who had been working in some industry. They had been skilled. They were tradespeople, and they would be forced out of work because of a closure of some plant, some employer, changes in the industry, whatever. They would go through these programs. They would get retrained to do something else. Within a couple months, they found another job paying as good or better than what they had before. And that program worked fantastic for those people. There were other folks, though, who came in without the, as they call them, soft skills. These are just being able to show up on time, pass a drug test, that sort of thing. Who did not, and who are still stuck there. And I think this isn't even necessarily a commentary on the SNAP program, but that I think part of what Clinton tried to do with the welfare reform was to, create this idea where everybody is working, engaging in the economy. So you're building skills. And if something bad does happen, you've got those skills to fall back on, and you get the retraining, and then you're back in the game as quickly as possible. And I think this is a step towards keeping more in line with the intent of welfare reform from the 90s.
And I might agree with that if we made much more serious investments in training and support for folks, but I think that our level of investment in that is absurdly low.
Okay.
All right. Well, on that note, I guess that pretty much runs us out of our time for today. But we actually are going to be talking more. Actually, where Jay, you and I for the midweek show. We're trying something new. I'll give the folks a little preview of that. A lot of folks have said about the interview, saying, they're not really bipartisan and so forth, and we'd like to hear from more than just Mike talking to some liberal guy. Well, we're actually going to try that out because I am going to be talking to some liberal guy, but Jay's got some thoughts about that interview as well. And so we're unveiling a new format for our interviews, and we hope you like it. That'll be on Wednesday. But before that as well, Jay and I are going to be doing the bonus show. And Jay, what are we going to be talking about in the bonus show this week?
Oh, we're going to be talking about arguments at the Supreme Court over guns. We'll be talking about Trump and the NATO summit and sort of, I don't know, the cool kids making fun of them.
Cool.
And probably some tariffs.
That should be good. Yeah. And then we also have the quick take, and Will is doing the quick take this week. And so all of that should be available to you if you are already a supporter. And if you're not, patreon.com/politicsguys, get signed up, or go to politicsguys.com/support. And if you want to get in touch with us, or again, if you're interested in maybe giving Politics Guys as a gift to that special or not so special anyone really, it's mail@politicsguys.com. Also, we've been having some great discussions at our new subreddit. That's Bipartisan Politics. Just go to reddit.com/r/bipartisan politics, or just go to Reddit and search for Bipartisan Politics. And if you don't already subscribe to the show, That costs you absolutely nothing and helps us out, so we would appreciate that, as do positive reviews on whatever podcast app you are listening to us on. Executive producer of the Politics Guys are Bruce Johnson, Wilma Moreno, Andra Masker, and Daniel Toe. Today's show is produced by Jay Carson and Michael Baranowski. We'll be back with a new show on Wednesday. We hope you'll join us.